No, you got it.
It is now 6:34, and I'm going to call the meeting to order for January 19th. Let's see, roll call. We have Mike Ahern, Chairman, John Ranlett, Vice Chair.
Paulson is excused.
Okay. Rhonda Bishop, John Kelly, Pat Roach. We have the Selectmen's alternate, Richard Lewis, and staff present, Sharon Penny.
And Bob Dragon is excused also, called in.
So it brings us to item number 3, public comments. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, administrative matters, where I am going to let Sharon talk about letter A.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Tonight was also supposed to be an opportunity for public testimony on the one item we have for a change to the Plymouth zoning ordinance, and due to an error in the posting, the newspaper, we missed the deadline by, I believe it was 2 days. It was a technical glitch. Anyway, I had sent you folks out an email and asking for another date on this. The time is getting very, very tight in terms of the posting, the statutory requirements for posting. And Dick Lewis fortunately pointed it out to me that the paper we're using at this point right now, because we have to do this expeditiously, they have Saturday, Sunday as one issue. So I had to make an executive decision today to put the public notice in for February 2nd of 2012, which is our regularly scheduled work session. That'll be in about 2 weeks, which will be the new hearing date for the public input on that one zoning change. So it'll be in the newspaper. It's duly posted here. At other places, there are some sheets in the back, and just FYI for anyone who's listening, tonight we will not be discussing any changes to the Plymouth zoning ordinance.
That brings us to minor subdivision, PID 240-002, Lot 1, 895 Texas Hill Road. Originally noticed for 12/15/11 and continued to this meeting, the owner seeks to divide the property back into 2 separate lots, which reflects the original lot configuration prior to a 1996 approved lot merger. This parcel is located in the agricultural zone. Sharon, did you want to?
Well, Mr. Casarino's here. He's going to represent himself. I do have the a copy of the large survey. Everybody got a smaller one, but if we just want to pass this around, this is exquisitely simple. As you mentioned before, this piece was 2 separate parcels previously, was properly merged by the previous planning board, and now the owner, Mr. Casarino, would like to essentially unmerge it. So it's technically a minor subdivision, but it's just a throwback to a previous status. So.
Okay, Mr. Casarino.
Thank you to the board for hearing me this evening. And as stated, I'm looking to kind of turn the hands of time backwards to the pre-merger status of the property as reflected on the map. And the 2 deeds which the 2 deeds describe that map. That map in 1974, I think Mr. Malcolmer stamped that map. And recently, a few years ago, Kevin French came up, Kevin French Surveying, and we resurveyed the whole property as well, did a wetland review, and we were very happy with, the findings. And other than a very few small discrepancy between chain and tape and GPS, Kevin French was very satisfied that properties were accurately recorded. I'm not sure why the previous owner had merged the 2 lots in '96, an out-of-state owner, but I'm looking to go back to put the lots to pre-'96 conditions and divide them back to the way it was prior to the merger.
Can you tell me just where these lots are? Are they anywhere near the Plymouth homestead?
No, I'm right across from Sandra Mitchell's land. If you go from the Dick Brown
The
end,
big field out there?
up the street a bit, I'm in the flats right next to Pete and Barbara Cass, next to their sugar shack.
Yeah.
So I'm about almost 1 proper mile from Dick Brown Road. So that's the easiest way, is to get in by Stanley Huckins' way up to my house, as opposed to twisting up from the pond. So I'm on the far end, and I lie between the gully before Pete and Barbara's sugar shack, and I'm kind of located right in the flats. And Mrs. Mitchell owns, I think, that whole stretch of road all the way down to the stop sign. So that gives you an idea of where on Texas Hill.
Ms. Bishop?
I just have a question, is it in current use at this time?
No, it is not. I suspect perhaps the owner prior, who did the merger, I suspect maybe that's what he was wanting to do. He was out of Waltham, Mass, and they had been coming up less and less. I suspect that was the original intent.
Right, because it would be 13.3 acres, so it would meet the minimum.
Yeah, he had met the minimum, and I don't know why he never went that direction. Maybe he was then looking to move the property. And he didn't purchase the property till 7 years ago.
And your house is on parcel 1?
Correct, yes, on the 6.34 parcel abutting the Cass property.
Okay.
I just have some comments.
Sure.
If none of the board needs any discussion on this, this is just some recommendations. Obviously, if it is in current use, it would come out as 2 separate parcels because they wouldn't meet the minimum for that. And I believe in the planner report that you folks got on this case, I've determined that the minor subdivision, obviously there's been no changes, this is just a pro forma, meets all current zoning ordinance criteria for frontage, lot size, septic area, and other requirements, which would create 2 new conforming lots of record. Mr. Casarino, I will urge the board, as a condition of this approval, this is just, again, pro forma, you'll need to file a corrected Mylar or a new Mylar, or have, if Kevin French is your surveyor, have Kevin do it with the related affidavit at the Grafton County Registry of Deeds, signed, sealed, and delivered by Kevin with his official stamp. And also, there'll have to be 2 new relevant deeds created for the 2 parcels, and the town would need, let's see, if Kevin files the actual Mylars, we would need 3 stamped copies of the new survey, signed, stamped, and the deeds, please, when they're done, just so we keep our records straight, so that your taxes are not messed up, because once a correction goes unheeded, it takes eons to fix it, so we'd appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I might want to make one correction. If he owns 2 lots next to each other, I don't believe he'd have to, if it were in current use now, I don't believe he'd have to make any changes to that until he or someone built a house or...
Okay, well, as long as he, speaks to Kate and makes sure that everything's all, that's right, because they're contiguous, so, yeah.
So at this point, we could entertain a motion that the application is complete? Unless anybody has any more questions? Mr. Lewis?
No questions. I'd make that motion.
Okay, second with Mr. Kelly. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, so the application is complete. Do we have any further discussion on the application or on the table? No. Then I would entertain a motion to approve the subdivision. Second?
Second.
Mr. Renlet, moved by Mr. Kelly.
With those conditions I mentioned?
With the condition, do you want to go over that again, or is that?
I'll be writing up the notice, so
All right.
I'll just,
All those in favor of approving the subdivision signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, that is done.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate being here.
that and $10 will get you a minor subdivision, so I'll see you later on that one. Okay. Not to worry, thanks. Yep, specifics. Great, thank you.
Item number 5, correspondence.
Nope.
Okay, brings us to
showed up.
number 6, unfinished and other business. We have A. Steve Tower, LLS, Roy Sanborn, of Sanborn Surveying to present an FYI notification for correction of illegal right-of-way description. Yes. All right.
I have some plans, and I have full-size plans and some small ones. I could leave a.
That'd be great.
We did, my assistant, Tyler, came down and spoke to Mr. Bay. Shared with him what we were trying to accomplish. Make sure that we cover the bases.
Actually, I have,
Is this where we did the site plan? The site plan?
No, this is how we
I've got one, Rhonda, thank you. So, yeah. I'll take that with me for the file, thank you.
And that one has been changed, the title.
Right, I know we spoke about that, so that's fine. Yep, that's great.
Okay. We started doing some work for Gary and Lisa Ladd, his wife. They own these two lots right now. They are separate entities on your tax map, separate deeds, everything. Then they started talking with the neighbor at the end, Sandra Richard, and agreed to purchase this lot. Sandra has 3 different lots, 1, 2, and 3. And they agreed to sell and purchase this from her. And so then we started doing our work, and first we did the work on this side and the boundary and the topo and stuff, and Gary said, well, I think we're gonna try to buy this other piece from Sandy. So then it soon became apparent that we had an issue with where the road was, okay? The end of the town-maintained road is on the Ladd boundary line right now, right here, yes, exactly. Yeah, we can address that right there. The town maintains to that point, okay? Beyond that, they do not. And as you can see with the double dash lines, this is where the original roadway was intended to go. From there, out through to where Karen Young and Brian Young have their place now. That road never got built in that location. The road exists as we've shown in yellow today on the plan. So it seemed as though the simplest, easiest way to fix this issue was to do up the new plan, locate the road where it actually is, and then exchange deeds between the parties. So what will actually happen is, and the Marples are the only people that really aren't involved. The Marples owned this lot for many, many years, and now it's in 2 daughters. And it sits between the Ladd and the Rister on the lake. They have the lakefront lot. They're not really a party to this. Nothing changes for them. Their driveway exists, their house, their buildings exist. Nothing is involved there. So what will happen is, after we get through this point tonight, and the reason I'm here tonight, let me just explain that. Normally, I would stamp this, not a subdivision. We'd record the plan. It would be a done deal. The certification I use on that, and it's laid out by the state statute, says if there's any subdivision or any new way that is shown, it needs to be signed off by the planning board. That's why I'm here, the new way terminology, because it exists, but it isn't where it originally was. So I think just to make it clean and clear and simple, that's why I'm here tonight.
We appreciate that.
Okay? It'll give everybody a chance to straighten out things that needed to be straightened out for a long time. Obviously, the Youngs are going in and out on the road, have been right along, but technically they're supposed to be down here. And of course, the other thing you become an issue is you're too close to the boundary of the road with this house that was built quite a number of years ago now. So all those things, if the road is really there, that's the way it is. But so anyhow, the ultimate goal will be to have you folks say, we don't have a problem with the relocation, and that's what we call it, plan of as-built right-of-way, because that's where the thing is, okay, for the 3 parties. Ultimately, Ms. Richard will sell this lot to Ms. Ladd, and they will come back with a request to merge this lot with this one. So you're going to eliminate one more owner, a possible owner up there, which is a good thing for the lake and whatnot. Ms. Rich is keeping these two at this point. I think they are for sale. And as far as we know, there's no change anticipated with the Youngs. And what will happen is the Youngs have a deeded right-of-way to get to their land, but technically it's down here. So they'll give a deed back to Sandra to extinguish that right. She will give them a new deed that says they have the right to go over her land, and Lisa will do the same thing, because they'll sell this to Lisa first. Then she and Sandra will give a new deed to the Youngs so they get legitimate access to use the road as shown on our plan. This plan, I brought a Mylar, the plan will go on record along with the deeds. So everything will be a nice, neat, tidy little package, and this won't be a problem in the future. That's the idea behind it. So I think that's pretty much sums up why I'm here and what's up, and I'd certainly be happy to try to answer any questions the board may have.
Sure. Any questions from Mr. Saborn? Ms. Bishop?
I just wanted to know where it ends for the maintenance from the town. Is it classified here for continuation for a Class 6 road? Or is it just town ends, that's the end, there's no, so this is a private way?
No,
Already, that's how I have it.
the town maintains to this point. They turn around in Gary's driveway, right here, Gary
Okay.
Lisa's driveway, okay? That's where they turn the truck
And
around.
then what, this road that's already existing, what is it classified?
That is going to be a Class 5 because it's town maintained.
Well, right there, but,
Right.
and then.
And it's all the way up to Loon Lake Road, to Chestnut Road. That's all, that same stretch, okay? So that would all be Class 5 from Chestnut Road to that point. From there on, it'll be a private driveway, a private roadway, whatever terminology you might choose to use.
So I'm assuming that on these two daughters, Kathleen and Carol's Marvel's property, that it's already deeded, because it looks like their actual driveway is on the lab property. So it must be already deeded, but they have the right.
Well,
right
but see,
to
that was always the intended road. So they're coming out of the intended road. They have no issue.
Okay.
So,
So
because
it
they're
wouldn't be an
already,
issue.
yeah, that's one of the things I was concerned about, but they are not, they don't have a problem because they're coming out of the where they're supposed to be anyhow. It's the people beyond is where Rich's and the Youngs that have the issue.
Yeah.
But Marples are free and clear, that nothing changes for them.
Okay, at this, yes, Mr. Lewis.
Kind of a follow-up to that question. So that section to the east of the Glad Marple property, where it says end of town maintained, that section right here is Class 6 property. That's the roadway.
There is, I have, yeah, technically, probably everybody owns the middle of the road if you want to split hairs, but the town has the overriding easement right based upon the restricted use that transpired through the years. This came up, Gary and Brian and some others, I think, but they were at a selectmen's meeting quite a few years ago and hashed this all out in the town. Everybody agreed, let's go to there because they could turn around in Gary's driveway. It made sense, and there wasn't any other good place. And that's why that point was chosen. There was no need to go beyond that at that time. I don't even think Sandra's house was there at that time.
Is there any intent of this being approved by the town for the extension?
There's been no talk about that whatsoever. I don't think anybody wants that, to be perfectly honest.
Is there any way that something could be said that they wouldn't be?
Mr. Ladd, sitting right here, Gary Ladd, my client, he can probably answer that, Mr. Kelly, better than I, but that hasn't been the way it's been presented to me.
The extension of what, the
Wow.
road is maintained now?
Where it is in town road down a 5-5 road, sometime along the way, someone might want to have it maintained, plowed, paved, whatever. And so if that is the intent of not having that done, it probably should be in writing so that it wouldn't be, but if it is intended to do that, I think maybe the board might like to know about it.
You're talking about the new driveway?
Yeah.
The private.
Yeah, no, and I mean, the right of way that's being granted doesn't conform to town specs.
No, the roadway
The
had to
intent
widen.
is to always leave it as a private driveway.
It has nothing to do with you, but if you should ever happen to dies or whatever, then, you know, somebody else could do it, and it could be rather expensive because I think that there are a lot of ledge out there and everything like that, so it could be.
Yeah, they'll never get a 50-foot right-of-way either. You know, it's, the right-of-way's 30, I think it's 30 feet on the plans.
Yeah.
You know,
40
they'll
feet?
never-
Oh, on
Yeah,
the
30
main old
foot,
one.
so that's gonna, in my town, that would be an automatic no. If you can't come up with 50 foot of right away, the town ain't gonna take it anyhow, so. And that's what's out there now, and we didn't try to widen it, so that isn't a possibility really, unless everybody got together and for some reason decided they wanted to do it. There's no benefit to anybody to do that.
This is basically an as-built, it's a correction
That's what
of the
it is.
record.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what the whole purpose of this is. As I said, when Mrs. Ladd takes title to that other lot, then she'll come back in with an application, which Mr. Kenny gave to us. We'll fill that out and we'll go back into that and ask that those could be merged, so there'll only be 3 owners.
All right,
Plus the models.
all right. Thank you, Mr. Saborn.
Mr.
Yes, go ahead.
I just, once again, I'm going to hold you to the same task. Mr. Casarino, could you make sure, Mr. Saborn, that we get copies of the new deeds too, just for later on when we're all gone and we don't,
You don't get those from the registry?
not necessarily.
I thought the town sent copies out to every
Well,
municipality.
sometimes, but I mean, that's where, not that you would do it, but sometimes that's where the ball gets dropped, and we end up having partial information on a change that's transpired, and 5 years down the road, you know,
They're going to be drafted, and
Yeah.
once they're drafted
Right.
and signed, there's no reason you can't have copies of them.
yeah.
Sure. But they will all be, the intent would be to ask you folks to sign the Mylar tonight, so we can give it to Mr. Ray, so that he can draft the documents.
Right.
And then he would probably record everything simultaneously. I think this is all going to happen at one time. And then he could furnish copies
Yeah.
to the board at the time that they're recorded.
That would be wonderful.
So at this point, we're looking for the planning board to approve this change in the private right-of-way serving those existing lots.
It's not, it's to approve the change in the plat, because as we all know, I just want to make sure in the language, the right-of-way itself, the de facto right-of-way isn't going anywhere. Where it should have been is not where it ended up. So you're approving the as-built, which corrects the survey plat.
The other part of the equation is that the survey plat never got recorded. It was done in the 50s. It never got to the history of
Well, there you go.
Okay, so there is no subdivision
Okay.
plat
So there's no record at the,
for this,
Oh.
this whole end of the world.
Wow.
All right,
Found a copy.
this is a good deed then.
It will clean up a lot of issues for a lot of people down the road.
Here's what my question was, is if it has really nothing to do with the town of Plymouth, why is it, if all the lots acceptable after this is all done with, what are we here for?
Because, Mr. Kelly, normally, as I said before, I have a certification that I put on my plan. If it's a boundary plan, I certify this is not a subdivision pursuant to RSA, blah, 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 that it's described it, and that no new ways are shown. That's terminology that it has to be on the plat. And I'm saying, this is an existing way, but it is not where the original way was designed by deed documents. So I think it is a new way. That's why I'm asking for you to sign the plat. Clear that up.
all right. So it looks like we are looking to approve the as-built change in the right-of-way concerning lots 201-13, 201-14, 201-15, 201-16, 201-17? Does that sound like that might handle the, if we get an approval on that, we'd cover all our bases?
I'm just trying to find the letter. Well, it wouldn't, yeah, it wouldn't hurt to have that in the notice of decision.
14, 14.
Here we go, it's on your letter. Yeah, it's on the letter.
How about 17?
17 is on the town street already.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about 17. Okay.
Those were the ones that were cited, just for technical.
Why would it be 14?
Well, again,
It's
the
technically
road, it doesn't
standard
change
repair.
anything for them, but it's not, it doesn't go within the strip beside Lot 14.
Okay.
That's why we put it in the paperwork.
Do we have any further discussion on this matter? So we are looking for a motion that would say to approve the as-built change in the right-of-way concerning lots 201-13, 201-14, 201-15, and 201-16. Moved by Mr. Kelly, second by Mr. Ranlett. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of this approval signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We're done.
Thank you very much.
Could we possibly get a signature at this point
Yep.
from you, sir?
Yep.
Well, I brought in, I think there were 8 copies here, so that all the parties can have one, and Attorney Ray and everything, and a Mylar.
Do you want to-
If any extras that folks don't need, I take those back to distribute. We need a copy.
I need 3 signed paper copies,
You got one,
which, yeah, so as long as I get 3, I don't care what that's. All right. This is noisy.
This is the Mylar right here? All right, so that's the only one I need to sign, correct?
No, I'd like you to sign them all if I may, so.
They all need to be signed. Nice.
I believe today's the 19th, right?
Not to worry.
We don't need a second signature, do we?
No.
Just the date. I can't see that far. Secretary.
I put secretary down as typically what we have.
That's me, so, yeah. Too much paper.
There you go.
Thank you very much, and I thank Ms. Kenny for her assistance.
Oh, you bet. It was a pleasure working with you guys. Glad,
Glad to get that cleaned up.
yeah, I love it.
Thank you. That brings us to item B, Michael McGinley, owner, and Jeffrey Lewis, PE, to present a conceptual plan regarding proposed development on Riverside Landing, Tenny Mountain Highway. Welcome back.
Good to be here. So I'm Jeff Lewis from North Point Engineering, here with Mr. McGinley, who is the property owner. And Riverside Landing is the property on Tenny Mountain Highway across from Highland Street that is probably known to everybody here as the Rose site or the Cornfield site or something like that.
The
So
mystery
we're
site.
The infamous site.
Right.
So we're here tonight to let you folks know what's going on and what hopefully is coming before you in the coming months here. Lowe's is, at the moment and probably for the future, not part of the project anymore. The quick history, I'm sure all of you know it probably better than I do myself, but the project was approved for a Lowe's development with a couple of pharmacy and a restaurant also on the site. After an appeal process, I finally made it to the Supreme Court in the spring of 2010, I believe, at which time the court upheld the planning board's decision. So for the last 2 years, there's been an approval in place from the planning board, a site plan approval for that development. It's set to expire, there's a 2-year approval, so it's set to expire in May of this year. There's also approvals in place for the state, for alteration terrain, through DES, for that project that are in place, and for several more years. I don't know what the expiration of that is, but it's down the road. But it looks like that development's not going to move forward in that layout. So I was just going to point out to you the property here. It's about 81 acres in total, and it's right here on this plan. Highland Street comes down right here, Kenny Mountain Highway right there. Baker River is right on the whole northern boundary of the site, and it's this big area here. Today, it's actually 3 separate parcels, all 3 are owned by Mr. McGinley. And this plan here is just a copy of the record approved site plan for Lowe's, just as an overview, to kind of show you what has been approved on the site. I just color-coded this really quickly to identify 2 different areas on the plan, which would end up being the subject of the appeal and the lawsuit. Right down here is the development area of the site. Those are the proposed Lowe's here, the pharmacy here, the restaurant here. There was going to be some extensive improvements done to the intersection of Highland Street and Mountain Highway, some road widening, new traffic signals, main access coming in here to serve the development. Obviously, the environmentally sensitive zone associated with the river, the floodplain and floodway associated with the river were all part of the constraints on this site that had to be dealt with. And the plan that ultimately got approved by the town and by the state was this layout, this configuration, in which they were taking a lot of fill material from down here in the floodplain adjacent to the river and bringing it up to use as developable material for the site. At the same time, this green area here would be the floodplain compensation area, because they did have floodplain impacts here. So there's a 1-to-1 mitigation proposed in this site, that being the developable area, this being the floodplain compensatory storage area. So at this point, Mike has a couple of users lined up that are in the final negotiation stages with them, and it's for a couple of small uses that we're proposing to be right up on the highway here. So what we're probably going to be coming before you with is a development, first phase development is what we're calling it, for some uses right on the highway. What we're going to try to do, our intent is to mimic the same development footprint that's already approved and in place for Lowe's, which would basically be a future build-out area over here that matches the development footprint of Lowe's. The same area utilized for floodplain mitigation and fill, but a phase 1 development for the 2 pad sites is what we're calling at the front, with the understanding that subsequent to that, we'd be coming back for the different uses as they become available, or as the end users become, come on board. Similar to the previous development, there'll need to be extensive offsite improvements associated with the intersection of Highland Street. We've had discussions with DOT, NHDOT, to the effect of phasing those improvements, so that as part of this initial phase with the front 2 pads, we'd only do a first phase improvement. The full build-out of that intersection would be necessitated until the full development or further development occurs on the site. So that's something that we're working with them on right now. So we're likely to come before you with a development plan, master plan, if you will, for this whole thing, but then a very specific plan for the front area, along with some proposed offset improvements for the first phase. you know, like I said, the intent would be that there'll be no more impact than what was previously approved and under the current approval. That goes for the, you know, impact of the floodplain, impact of the floodway, impact of the environmentally sensitive zone, total building coverage. I think they had total 130,000 square feet of building area on this plan, and we would not exceed that on this development plan. So we could legitimately say it'll be no more impact. If anything, it'll be less of an impact than there is in the current plan. That's basically it. I mean, like I said, we just wanted to, you know, let you folks know where we are. We're not necessarily looking for any feedback or with specific questions. If you obviously have any for us or any questions, we'd be happy to talk about those. But we are hoping that we're back here within the coming months for a formal application with 412.
How big is the building?
These are just two pad sites that we have out here right now. We're proposed a little bit different than what was proposed in the Lowe's development. We're probably going to be proposing to actually carve off some lots as we go so that they'll be on individual lots. So we're showing a 1.5 acre and just under 1.5 acre lot out there. We will each have a smaller size commercial development. The idea would be that there'd be a shared drive that comes in between them. It would then serve for the main access, very similar to what the Lowe's plan was. There was a main access that came in and served the development with pads on either side. So we're just trying to carve off a reasonable area for a first phase of development.
Well, in essence, you could have like 4 of those buildings, pads, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, there's a number of alternatives, and we're marketing it several different ways with some larger end users on the back, not as big as the Lowe's store, or several pad sites or something like that. But what we do have is we do want to come in with the two front users now, knowing that we don't know exactly what's going to happen on the back at this point.
And what's going to happen to the intersection?
Well,
I know Lowe's was big enough so that they could do the improvements on that.
Right, the Lowe's plan, the traffic that was generated from that necessitated additional lanes, turning lanes in either direction, and some widening of the road and re-signalization of the road, obviously because of turning lanes and adding a 4th lane on the intersection. So the traffic that's generated by these two pads would not necessitate the additional lanes, so there wouldn't be any road widening per se as part of this first phase of development. What we'd be doing is going in and adding the 4th signal for the northbound leg of that intersection, and fixing up the signals that are out there, because there would be some left turn movement into the site that would be done by the middle lane that's out there now. And then whenever there was another future development out here, that would trigger the widening of the intersection. So that would be done in phases, the intersection improvements.
Good question, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Bishop?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, first if you can tell me, you said that there are 1.5 acres per pad there. What is the total large pad of the Lowe's proposed? How many acres is that in the brown spot there?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have that right here. I'm trying to think if I have a quick way to figure that out. I don't know off the top of my head, so I would say it's 16 acres or so, something like that. 16 to 20 acres maybe.
The other question I had, I just wanted to figure out, to get a sense, I don't know how you guys look at it with a percentage ratio, like you're only using, like, what you're saying is 1.5, so you're actually using 3 acres of that, 16. So I'm just wondering, is there a percentage ratio that you look for? Okay, we're using this amount, so we need to take this amount from, say, one of those third parcels out of the sensitive zone, bring that in and bring it out. Is there like a percentage of that dirt that you need to bring in?
Right, well,
Do you have a
right, we
percentage?
would only bring the dirt in as we need it, so.
There's going to be, you're working with a ratio right now. I mean, to be considered for that 16 acres, you had to bring out
Yeah,
Right.
that so much more. So
Yeah.
Is that how it's figured?
Yeah, that's in the
Accepted?
alteration of terrain that would be,
Yeah, I mean, the idea at the end of the day, that we'd be bringing all the dirt out to fill in this whole area. So that could happen in the next phase of the development. Right, you're asking right now for just these two front pads, how much will we need to bring out? Yeah, it's,
Right, how was that
it is.
work with the state approval and all that stuff? Is it like, okay, you were gonna do this before this was approved, so we're gonna start?
We would need, to- similar to what we would need to do with the town, we will need to be getting a new state permits for anything that we're doing out there.
it's a different
Okay,
configuration.
but similar to the planning board, we'll be building on, we'll be starting over with the planning board. But we don't want to reinvent the wheel because this is a sensitive area and sensitive subjects out there, so we want to make sure that we're, using our resources.
Just wanted to see if it was a simple thing.
Mr. Kelly?
I guess my big concern is if anybody came out from the traffic circle down to where the new CBS is, many of those buildings are not the most attractive buildings in the world. And there's a lot of small one-story buildings. And it looks to me like that's exactly what's going to continue on. And with Lowe's, it was a big national concern, and so consequently, they were bound by a lot of regulations and national items. But when you start putting your really small stores up there, you're just going to continue with your pizza places and your Wise Guy hardware store or automobile store, and it's just going to continue to be not aesthetic as far as Plymouth is concerned.
Yeah.
There's going to be more little stores along the way there, and I just don't know, and I don't know whether this has anything to do with it, but I just think that the planning board has got, and that's what the planning board is for, is to have a plan for Plymouth and to have an acceptable plan that was nice looking and could be controlled by not just Plymouth's desire, but the national desire. And I'm just afraid you can put two more in there, and I can just see two pizza places and a hardware store and some other store there. And it's just, I think it just irritates the whole situation along Tenny Mountain Highway.
Thank you, Mr.
More
Kelly.
than it helps it.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
We will have an opportunity for design review at that point. Right now, this is purely conceptual, and I certainly take to heart Mr. Kelly's concerns. That's where we perhaps need to tighten up our design specifications a little bit more. But these folks are still, working with entities, and I think there's an even chance that they may be of a franchisee type aspect, which would have some corporate design standards to begin with, but we're not going to let anybody put up any tar paper shacks, so you can rest assured on that. But I do take Mr. Kelly's concerns to heart, because we have to think comprehensively about Tenny Mountain Highway, because it is kind of piecemeal. But we need to not stray too far into particulars at this point, because this is not an abutter noticed presentation, so.
Mr. Roach?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. At this point, do you have any people interested in those, purchasing those pad sites?
Yeah,
I don't need to know who, I just want to know. if you have.
There's a bank proposed for one site and a fast food restaurant for the other.
Oh,
That's
okay.
basically what I can say. Right now, those are in the final stages of negotiation, so hopefully we'll be coming back with those two specific issues.
And they would share the driveway, you said, right?
It should be shared driveway between the two of them.
Thank you.
Mr. Lewis, I noticed the lot on the right goes outside of the pad area. That's just the property line, not
Yes,
necessarily the pad.
That's right, the development line would be, right, that's correct.
I would like to say, just so that everyone realizes that due diligence is definitely in place, Mr. McGinley and Mr. Lewis have been meeting very informally once or twice with Brian Murphy, our building inspector / zoning officer, and myself, just to work through this in the proper manner and just, have everybody up to speed and know what the particulars are to, make sure it's all done correctly, because this particular previous development, as we all know, was an issue of contention, so they are very diligent in making sure that all the prescriptions in terms of alterations of terrain and sensitive overlays and everything else will be adhered to, so.
Yes, Mr. Kelly.
When Lowe's was coming in here, they were willing to put in natural habitat areas. They were willing to put in a boat ramp. They were willing to put in athletic fields. They were willing to do so many things. And right now, that is out the window, and we're grappling to get something in there. And I said it a long time ago, Mr. McGinley is going to sell that land to somebody. And number one, I'm not going to get the taxes we did out of Lowe's, and number two, it's just going to be a bunch of little stores out there. And again, I'm just thinking of what Tenny Mountain is now and what it's just going to irritate more as far as the buildings are concerned. And so I just hope that all of this goes to pass, that a lot of that stuff that we put it up for free is down the drain now, and we'll have a bunch of little stores up there. And I know who gives them for doing that. I just feel that the guys got a raw deal.
Do you need anything more from us, Mr. Lewis?
No, I don't think so. You have any questions, Dan? No?
Okay. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That brings us to item C. Harry Blackie with Bico, Fairgrounds Road, request for reconsideration of approval extension for a portion of Mountain View Farms phased development.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to give a little background on this, or a reiteration, and Mr. Blackie, correct me if I'm wrong. Mountain View Farms, as we all know, went through some iterations and has been partially developed to a certain extent. At the time, 7 years ago actually, that the approval was given, it was for 7-year approval for both the subdivision and the site plan for what we'll just call the condo developments. Mr. Blackie approached myself and Mr. Murphy, I think it was sometime last year, just for clarification, because he knew that the initial approval was, the clock was ticking on it, came before you folks, and the board directed me to speak to our attorney once again, Attorney Radigan, to get essentially his professional input as a land use lawyer on where all the approvals stood. Mr. Blackie was looking to see whether or not the approval, which at this point is 5512, if he had to basically re-up for an extension of it, of both of these approvals, site plan and subdivision, or if in fact both of these projects were vested by active and substantial development. And you've all had this paperwork before, but I'm just kind of reiterating this to bring everybody back up to speed. Our attorney said that, in fact, in his professional opinion, the subdivision was fully vested because of the drainage and road improvements down there on the site, but conversely, that in his opinion, the site plan was not vested. So that means that at this point, the subdivision of Mountain View Farms is good to go forever and ever, amen, is not subject to any changes, potential changes in the zoning. However, the approval on the site plan is due to expire on May 5th of this year. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Blackie, I think Mr. Blackie's here to just speak to Attorney Radigan's ruling and to have a conversation with the board. Is that fair?
Yeah, and to propose a course of action.
Okay.
Given the circumstances. Thank you very much for helping with the presentation.
Well, I just wanted to make sure I knew what we were talking about.
And what I've done tonight is I've given, most of you have a package anyway, and we'll refer to that as we speak. It might be best
did he just pass that
if you
out?
start by looking at the plan on
No,
the
but
on the
I've
back.
got-
And I'm going to try and bring you up to date on what exists out there now and what was approved initially. Matter of background, there's some new faces here for me, and I know, I don't think there's anybody here who was on the board when this was approved. If there is, there's not more than
No,
one.
Mr. Gosney's absent tonight, so.
Yeah.
He's the only one.
Okay, so, and it has been 6.5 years, it's hard to believe. I don't have to tell any of you what's happened with the economy in the last 6.5 years. Our timing was just perfect. The day we got the last approval is the day that everybody felt, real estate fell off the end of the world. And so we've been scrambling virtually ever since day one just to keep this thing alive. But what was approved here was a 45-lot subdivision. You don't have the entire parcel there, but you might want to look at this for a second and then look back to your plan. So what was approved were 45 lots, and one of those lots was, they were all individual lots with one exception, and that's lot 44, which was approved for 38 condominiums. So the lots are down in here, the condominiums are up here, and the plan that you have there just doesn't show the back end of the property and the entire lot 44, which is about 41 acres. And so that's what was approved. In terms of the status of that, the road improvements have been completed for Crescent Street in its entirety. Just in recent months, you have approved Plymouth Woods, which reconfigures this area, and they're actually under construction out there. I was out there today. They're under construction. So the only portion of the subdivision, if you will, that hasn't been actively pursued is this area over here. This road is not in. This road is the subdivision road that services not only the lots along here, but also services lot 44, which is the big condominium lot. So the road for that lot is in. So that's what was approved initially, and the status of the construction. There were actually 4 approvals granted by the town, 2 by the planning board and 2 by the ZBA. The planning board approved the 45-lot subdivision as a subdivision, and as I said, one of the lot 44 of the 45 is the condominium lot. The planning board also issued a site plan review approval, and basically what that, and that was for the condominium area, that was for lot 44, and basically what that approval did was it approved the driveway configuration and the location of the buildings. What the ZBA did, they issued 2 permits, or 2 special permits. One to allow more than 1 building on a lot. They approved the number, and I can't even remember how many buildings there are approved here, but they approved the site for that many buildings. And the second approval that the ZBA granted was an approval to allow multifamily buildings. So one to allow more than 1 building on a lot, and a second approval to allow multifamily buildings. These buildings contain between 1 and 4 units. So those were the 4 approvals that were granted at the time, and there was some coordination between the boards as that process unfolded. So now fast forward, if we can, 7 years, and the issue that brought me before this board back in August was the fact that there were some conditions in the planning board's approvals and in the ZBA approvals that suggested some timeframes within which certain things had to be completed. And if you want to look at the first document in that file that I gave you, that's the That's the subdivision approval, and I've highlighted, that's the 44-lot subdivision approval. And the condition that that I'm raising here as, I don't want to call it a concern, but we need to deal with it, is it says all subdivision improvements must be completed within 7 years of this decision unless extended by the planning board. So that was a condition. Do you see that there? Does everybody follow where that is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fine. Now, if you will turn to B in the package, this is the site plan approval. And there's a condition in the site plan approval that says active and substantial development must begin within 7 years from the date of this approval. Now, both of these were approved at the same time, and that 7 years expires in May of 2012. It's hard to believe that our economy's been in this circumstance for this long, but I suspect most of you have felt it just as we have in one way or another. So I've stopped having to explain to people what that's all about because pretty much everybody understands it. So those were the two things that were in question, and the issue is, are those valid? I mean, are those things that we need to be concerned about? Is there some question about whether or not those two approvals are active going forward? And part of the answer can be found in D, if you'll turn to D. So what happened after the two planning board approvals was that there was an amendment to those approvals. And what that amendment addressed, let me just find this. Okay, I'm sorry. If you'll turn to C, keep my letters straight here. So C is an addendum or an amendment, if you will, to the approvals. And you can see what I've highlighted for an amendment to the original approval of the Mountain View Farm subdivision. And then if you'll skip down to where I've highlighted, approval of the development agreement. So what happened was we, as the developers, entered into a development agreement with the town, and that constituted an amendment to the original approvals. And that development agreement is item D. So if you'll now go over to item D, ignore the pretty colors there. All I'm trying to demonstrate to you at this point is that this constituted an amendment to the original approvals, and there were two purposes of it. One was to create a phasing schedule, which it did. It created, if you look on page, the third, what have I done here? Left out a page? No. Oh, I'm sorry. The third page, you'll see that there are phases A, B, C, and D. So what's happened here is the roads are in for phase A, the roads are in for phase B, which includes lot 44, the condominium lot. Is everybody with me? No?
I don't get to page 3.
The third page of Exhibit D.
Okay. Okay.
You see the phasing
Oh, okay.
schedule there?
Got it.
Okay, so phase A is complete, phase B is complete in terms of the roads, and that includes the condominium lot. Phase C is the area which has yet to be developed, no roads in, and phase D is the area which has been reconfigured as Plymouth Woods.
Could I just interrupt for a second for my own clarification?
Yep.
The road to the condominium lot
Yeah.
This is C.
is essentially Crescent Street, you're saying?
Yeah, do you have a, you want to look at that
What
plan?
is this? He's
I
got
was
this
looking at your-
highlighted as C.
Oh,
That
I think it'll show up easier on
He's got A, B.
all of,
I think
all
it's
of
just
this right here.
describing.
Right.
This is lot 44,
I
so
think it's
all this
describing these
frontage
phases.
is on Crescent Street, so that's the frontage for lot
Okay,
44.
and those are interior driveways,
Page
Harry?
These are all
Talking
interior
about-
private driveways.
Okay.
I think he's saying the third page.
So,
D.
so the development
the
agreement,
first.
its purpose was
That's
two
the
things.
second,
Number
that's
one,
the
to
third
create the
page.
phasing, And the second thing was to define the term active and substantial development and building. Because you may remember, when we look back at the approval for the site plan, it said within 7 years, you had to complete active and substantial development, or you have to begin. Active and substantial development must begin within 7 years. But then, that's what the original approval said, but what does that mean? So in the development agreement, that was defined. Okay? So, and that had to be completed. The development agreement called for us to achieve that within 1 year, which we did. So, from the standpoint of the development agreement, we have, some years ago, achieved active and substantial development. So the question that town council addressed, and by the way, we agree with the town council's ruling, or his opinion. What he said was that when you read the development agreement, it's very clear that the subdivision approval that was granted by the planning board, that the subdivision is vested, that we've achieved the active and substantial development. And so he's suggesting that the subdivision is vested. But he went on to say that he can't find any language in the development agreement that speaks to the site plan approval. Can't find anything in there that specifically says that it includes the site plan approval. And I think he's right. I don't think it is in there. But I think, I'm reasonably sure that the intent was that that the development agreement was intended to cover both. And I'm going to point out some, first of all, I was there, so that's my memory. And second of all, I'm going to point out some things that town council couldn't have been aware of when he made that ruling. And I'm not questioning, or not the ruling, but he offered his comments. I think he was exactly right. But the things that he wouldn't have been aware of are that, I told you we had 4 approvals, 2 from the planning board and 2 from the Board of Appeals. And 3 of those approvals were approvals that granted permission to do something. The subdivision approval issued by the planning board was granted to give permission to build the site, to build the development, the entire development. The 2 ZBA approvals were granted, 1 to allow more than 1 building on a lot, and 2 to do multifamily buildings. The 4th approval, the site plan approval, what it did was it approved the configuration. It didn't say you could build 39 units or 38 units. It didn't say you could build multifamily buildings. It didn't say that you could put more than 1 building on a lot. All it said was, or what it said was, this is the configuration of the road and this is where the buildings are going to go. The Board of Appeals, after they issued their 2 approvals, they amended their approval as well. And if you will look at E, you will see the amendment that the ZBA did. So this short 1-page document says that this is an amendment to 2 special exceptions that were issued, and what it says is that they gave us a 1-year extension that was conditional, and the condition was that active and substantial building and development, as provided for in section 1204-2C of the zoning ordinance, and as it relates to these special exceptions, shall be consistent with the definition for the same term adopted by the planning board relative to the subdivision approval granted for Mountain View Farm. So what they were saying was, once the subdivision under the planning board approval achieves substantial completion, we've also accomplished that as far as the 2 ZBA decisions are concerned. So what that means is, as of right now, based on town council's comments, there are 3 permits which are vested. the subdivision approval and the 2 ZBA approvals are all three vested. And then we've got this little tail still wagging here that we're trying to figure out how to deal with, and that's the site plan approval. And I told you that, and I know this is a lot of information, and stop me if I can answer a question. I'm really sorry that this is so confusing. I told you that I thought that there were some things in the development agreement, although it didn't actually reference the site plan approval, that certainly suggested to me that the intent was to include that. And I'm going to talk about those for just a second. First of all, the plan, if you look at the first page of the development agreement, which is item D, and you go to the second paragraph that says whereas, it says whereas the planning board has approved the Mountain View Farm subdivision as shown on plan recorded as plan 11987, and it talks about, let's see, with the condition identified in a document entitled Plymouth Planning Board Notice of Decision dated May 5th, 2005. Now the problem is that both of those approvals, the subdivision approval and the site plan approval, that those pieces of land were shown on that plan, and they were both approved on that date. They were both approved on that date. So, you know, are they talking about just one of the approvals, or are they talking about both of them? If you go over to the third page of the development agreement, and that's item D, by the way, and if you go to the phasing schedule, and you look at phase B, you'll find there's lot 44. Lot 44 is the condominium lot. So clearly the intent was that that be part of the phase. Okay, so there's some things in here that I think, there's no clear language, nowhere in here does it say site plan approval. But I was there, there's no question in my mind but that was the intent. And the fact that the Board of Appeals dovetailed their approvals with respect to substantial completion into the planning boards, and those have achieved substantial completion. The combination of those things and the language that I'm finding in the development agreement, I'm reasonably confident that the intent was to have the substantial completion definition apply to both permits.
Approvals.
Say it again?
Approvals.
Yes, exactly, I'm sorry.
Yep.
So, is there anybody here who's not confused?
Can I ask just a question? On Exhibit D, you've got the little taped on section at the beginning that's highlighted in pink. Is that, I guess I'm not sure what that is.
Okay, that's a good question. So what's the solution here? And here's what, this is the end of the presentation, and I'll try and answer your question. So what town council has said is the subdivision approval is vested. The ZBA has said both of their approvals is vested. And the question is whether the site plan approval is vested, or whether that's going to have some other term on it in terms of when it has to be completed. Doesn't make any sense to me that we'd have a condominium lot where there are 3 approvals, 2 by the ZBA and 1 by the planning board, and there's one set of completion standards for one of the permits and a different one for the others. So what I'm proposing is, because town council has, and I think correctly, pointed out that the language wasn't particularly good in that development agreement because it didn't clearly speak to the site plan approval. So what I'm actually suggesting or proposing, asking you to consider, is doing a simple clarification to that development agreement to make it clear that the intent is to have the definition for substantial completion the same for site plan approval as it is for the other three permits. And that is one possible way to do that.
That's your proposed language.
That's exactly right. And I'm not an attorney, and if I were, my preference would be that your town council propose the right way to do that. All I'm not asking the board to agree with my language. I'm not asking them to establish the language. I'm asking you to consider clarifying the language by making it clear that the development agreement reference both of the planning board rules, and how to do that from a linguistic standpoint probably falls within town council's bailiwick. But that's what that was. It was an effort to show that it could be rectified pretty simply with a few word changes.
So it looks like, I'm thinking the board needs to table this till our next meeting and have time for
Oh,
Attorney
yeah.
Radigan to look at this.
I think we should proceed thoroughly with this. Yeah,
Okay.
that's all I'm going to say.
Is that,
Yeah, I can, let me, and I agree with that. I just, what I would say to you is, I'm not suggesting to you that you need to figure out whether or not that's what the intent was. That's not the issue. The board, you don't have to look backwards and try and figure out what that board at the time wanted. I'm asking you to consider the circumstances as they exist today and to make a decision about whether or not that's appropriate.
any questions? Mr. Lewis?
Could you just pick that up? and
Yeah,
just
I'd
kinda
like to see
orient
it
the right
again,
way?
please.
I mean, I'm looking at that section of Crescent Street that was built, well, kind of up from that intersection where the Y is, right?
Right here.
Right by the farmhouse.
Right.
Kind of, that whole section, it seems like that whole section was built for the purposes of Lot 44.
You mean from here?
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. It created frontage for these lots along here.
Okay.
So what it did was, it created the frontage on this side of the street, you're absolutely right, for the condominium lot, and on the other side of the street for these lots along here. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe a follow-up is, I mean, not knowing exactly what question was put to Attorney Radigan and what information was provided for him, it's hard to kind of put his answer into the proper perspective.
Excuse me, I gave him the development agreement. I think and I can look, Harry had sent me essentially this
Yeah.
stuff before, and I gave that to him too, just so he would have the chronology.
Right.
So he got a lot of
No, I
information.
think he did. Like I said, I'm not suggesting that, I think he's right. I think he's absolutely right. And I'm not asking you to look back over your shoulder and try and figure out what the previous board wanted. I'm asking you to consider the circumstance today, and unquestionably, I don't think you need town council's opinion to decide whether you have the authority to do that, although you may want to ask us, but clearly you have the authority to amend the development agreement if you want to. I'm suggesting that I think it makes logical sense, rather than to have 3 permits with one definition and 1 permit with a different definition. And it's not that there's a different definition, there isn't any definition. Because if the development agreement doesn't apply to the site plan approval, then for the site plan approval, there is no definition for substantial completion. We don't know what it is.
Now, could you possibly show me where the condominium
Where do they go?
might be?
Yes, sir, I can. So this is Crescent Street, which is currently
Yeah.
built out. And these are a series of private driveways, and all of these buildings up here that are shown, those are the condominiums.
Oh, okay, so that condominium goes up over the hill.
Yes, sir, it does.
And they're group condominiums, they're not townhouse type condominiums?
They are townhouse. In fact, some of them are freestanding individual homes, which are actually condominiums.
Right.
The largest building, that's a 4-unit building. This is a 3-unit building, that's a 2-unit building. These are all single unit buildings. 3 unit, 3 unit, 3 unit, 3 unit.
Just so I understand, the subdivision, well, I'll ask a question to Glenn. The site plan approval, that looked at purely the condominium
That's correct.
portion of it?
That's right.
So all of the roadway layouts, cross-sections, footprints, drainage, et cetera, for all the condos were covered under that
That's
site
correct.
plan approval?
That's right. Your regulations require a site plan approval for multifamily housing. So by virtue of the fact that there was multifamily housing here on this lot, in addition to the subdivision approval, there was a second approval required for the site plan because there are multifamily buildings there. But again, it doesn't give us permission to do anything. It's kind of a different approval than the other three. It doesn't give us permission to do anything. It just says, yes, this building will be here, this building will be here, and this is where the driveway will be, and this is how the drainage will be.
If I may, I'll sort of put this out there, and I don't put it out there with any goal of muddying the waters, but just sort of a philosophical thing that's kind of been on my mind for many, many years. If you look at the RSA that talks about active and substantial investing, the whole purpose of that is to give certain levels of protection to site plan projects and subdivision projects against changes in site plan regulations and subdivision regulations. If there haven't been any changes in either one of those two regulations and the underlying zoning under which the initial permits were issued, I don't think it makes much difference if 6 years or 7 years or 27 years goes by. If those regulations never change, I think you can make a pretty good case that I'm good to go, at any point in time.
I mean, could we extend
Yes,
it
yes,
another
yes.
2 or 3 years, or 2 years
Months
at
or
least? Or
whatever.
Yeah,
we understand the circumstances,
Yeah,
so.
you can do that, but frankly, it creates a burden that we would prefer not to have, because that means it's still hanging over our head. We don't know how much longer this problem is going to go on. I don't want to be back here in another 2 years and talking about this again. And the fact that the subdivision, the subdivision we've reached substantial development there, and the ZBA says that we have the right to build these multifamily buildings forever. We have the right to have these buildings in this place forever. The only issue is whether or not we have site plan approval, i.e., the drainage system and the road system. And it just doesn't make any sense to me not to have that to be consistent with the other approvals.
So you don't want to have to come back as our possible engineer could require you to build a whole lot more to make those roads possible?
I guess so. I mean, they're all private roads. Well, that's the other issue, I guess, is a cost issue. I mean, we spent, I don't know, a couple $100,000 doing those plans. I mean, and there's other issues too. There's lenders. We've got a lender here who's saying, wait a minute, I'm a little concerned about these permits, If you were to grant us a 2-year approval, or a 2-year extension, I'm sorry, for this aspect of the approvals, then that just keeps a cloud over the thing from the lender standpoint, as opposed to him knowing that he's comfortable that if this circumstance goes on, this economic circumstance that where it goes on for another 3 or 4 years, or 5 years, where's the lender at? Well, he's worried is where he is. Because you could grant an approval, an extension of that for a year or even 2 years, and if this economy doesn't change,
Which could be another 5 years.
yeah, that doesn't help at all. And 18 months from now, I mean, even now, we've got a lender who would be saying, hey, wait a minute, guys, I'm not sure that I can hang in there with you guys because I don't know what's going to happen. They gave you a 2-year extension, but if we need another one, can we get it? And the answer always has to be, I have no idea whether we get it.
Mr. Kelly?
My biggest problem is, I think you've done a nice job here, and as long as you own it, that is perfectly all right. But I believe there was, one section has already been sold off to a nonprofit organization, and my only concern is the next year and the next 2 years, that you sell it off, and then somebody else takes it over and doesn't do the excellent job that you've been doing. So if there was some kind of a wording or something saying as long as you folks do it, then it could be extended. The other thing is that if you come in every couple of years, we'd like to see your face, number one. And number two, it just wouldn't be a big major problem of coming in and having it extended and having the wording say that it would be automatic by you just coming in and coming before the board, so that they would say it was all right, and then that way, at least we could keep a handle on it, both that you're going to own it and that something isn't going to happen in a few years. I'm not too sure, but I know that if a lender, if it's going to impair your problem with a lender, then I'm not that strongly, for that, but I just think it could be a stopgap of some kind to keep everybody on the low end.
Okay? I'd be happy to respond to that. First of all, thank you very much for the confidence in us. I appreciate that. My guess is that you probably can't do that.
You can't.
I don't think you can legally do that, but you could, you certainly could condition your approval or the modification or the clarification on the owner coming back before the planning board once a year. You could clearly condition it on that if you wanted to. In terms of us not owning the property and somebody else stepping in, you mentioned Plymouth Woods, that's a perfect example. That has been a change, but you approved the change. If anybody wants to do anything other, if we were to, my brother and I were to get run over by a bus tomorrow, and we were to be replaced by somebody else, we wouldn't be doing the development, but whoever did it would have to meet the same design standards that we would have to, and if they wanted to change those, just as is the case with Plymouth, they'd have to come before this board and...
Yeah, just an addendum to that is, I mean, the crux to the matter here is phasing, and we won't, obviously, phasing and zoning changes, as they occur, there's a certain amount of risk there, but phasing, building phase one has a cumulative effect on the land mass for phase two, phase three, or ABC, whatever. There is, we'll speak to the elephant in the room, there is topography there is drainage. So phasing, the good part about phasing is you get a chance to do it as you can. The potential for something that's not as happy is that you may have cumulative effects, but we do have oversight by the town engineer as stuff is developed. And those regulations, or those standards will be adhered to. So I'm not playing either side of this, I'm just saying that phasing brings a double-edged sword.
Yeah, but we've got to live with that no matter what happens to my request, I think.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. But nobody's going to, this is a pretty significant development, no matter where you're from. And I don't think there's any other way than to face it. I don't think anybody's going to drop in here and drop 83 units out of the sky all at once.
I can see why they want to put limits of 7 years on this, because you come back to the board and it's completely different, and we're sitting here kind of just staring at you. But under the circumstances, it'd be nice to give him something to go home with. It'd be nice to give a solution tonight, but I'm not sure how how confident I am with doing that. I'd love to be able to have 2 or 3 different scenarios where we could give you something after talking to the town council that we could then make a decision with. Mr. Ranlett?
I would make a recommendation that we move this to the agenda for
The work session. Mhm.
So, I mean, there's a lot to absorb here, and we've looked at it in different ways, and I know myself, I don't feel comfortable making a decision either way tonight. We just got Radigan's letter today, and, you know, I would personally like to take care of it, and I think this way, you know, we can move along tonight's meeting, and we can have 2 weeks to take a look at what we have in front of us, bring it up to the work session, and discuss it at that time.
All right, so we're looking at tabling it. Do we need to?
We need a motion, yeah.
Okay, so do we have a motion?
Mr. Ranlett just
I
made
make
the
a
motion.
We table this to our work session.
Second it.
Mr. Roach will be second. Mr. Roach, all those in favor of tabling this item for our work session meeting,
February 2nd.
February 2nd? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Do we need to, on a flag plan like this at all?
I'm not sure what I have. Harry, is it possible to get even a black and white of that schematic? Because
Yeah.
that's really effective, because it shows the whole thing and it's got good topo on it, so.
Yeah, I actually have a smaller version of that in color.
That'd be great.
So I'd be happy to get that to you. And I mean, somewhere you have the entire set.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I know, but
Yeah.
we discussed this before.
I'd be happy.
I appreciate it.
I think we've gone
Oh.
through that in the archives, too.
I have to have Harry send me stuff because it's so buried I can't find it.
Do you want it? Okay. So that brings us to item number 7.
Oh, downstairs
Thank
in
you.
the
Just,
old
if I could-
jail.
sorry, I could ask
Go
you a
ahead.
question.
Can't-
So
can't
is
sort
there
it
any
out.
reason for us to be, can we give you any more information? Is there any reason for us to be represented at that work session? I assume not, but I don't know.
I mean, in my opinion, I think if we look at it and we have any questions, we can address them to Sharon. If she has the information, she can pass it on
I
to
can,
us.
yeah.
And
yeah.
if not, Sharon could go ahead and contact you.
I just, you do have this documentation tonight. I believe I passed that out.
You
When
did.
when were you here? October of last?
It's hard to say,
August of
but-
last year? Okay.
Yeah.
So you should have in
Yeah, I
your
think we
massive
did.
files a lot of paper.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we do because
Okay,
it
right.
came up.
It did. Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing it, and I've been on it.
Do you want to collect these again so we make sure we don't lose them from now in 2 weeks?
Correct.
Well, he left 4 or 5.
No, you get to keep it. Although do you have, Harry, do you have a working copy for me? I know I've got this in one configuration or another, but if it's okay, if I could take that copy, then at least I'll be literally on the same page with everybody else. So. Thank you so
And I
much.
think in terms of the things that were given to your attorney, I think it wouldn't have changed what he said, but I really think that the biggest issue here for consideration is something that he would have been unaware of, or he wouldn't have considered at the time, because it wasn't part of the package that I had given you before, and that is the fact that the ZBA, has
Oh,
granted
right.
2 approvals. He was thinking that there were 2 approvals, 2 planning board approvals, but I don't believe that he considered the fact that there were 4 approvals, and 3 of them have defined substantial completion exactly the same. And it's the 4th one that I believe the intent was to define it the same in that agreement, but there's no specific language in there, and that's the piece that I
Yeah,
think.
I don't think we coordinated the
No.
paperwork that time. It was a different
Well, we were only
arrangement.
dealing with the planning board stuff.
Right,
It only came to
right,
my mind
right,
later
yeah.
that the ZBA could shed some, that those decisions could shed some light.
So we will try and relay that to Attorney Radigan and,
Yes, we
or our
would,
workshop meeting.
Yep. Do you feel that this letter, gosh, I'm trying to remember. No, he didn't get a copy of this most recent one from November. Would you feel that the reference to the ZBA special exceptions that, has been your premise tonight, in this letter would suffice to send to our town attorney?
Now,
Or would you like to
why don't you let me...
craft something else?
Yeah, I'd be
Okay.
happy to do that.
Yeah.
That I think might be helpful.
Yeah.
And remember that I'm not suggesting that he's
Right.
misinterpreted it. I'm not even suggesting that what he said isn't correct.
Right.
I'm asking you to consider amending the development agreement. Do you have the right to do that? Absolutely, you can do anything you want to, as long as we mutually agree, we're the two parties in the contract, we can change the contract any way we want to.
If you write it in that approach to the board through me and just cite that, because it'll go to Attorney Radigan, then maybe he will see a different perspective.
Fair.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't have to change his perspective.
Well, but the addendum,
Yeah.
which, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
No, okay, thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you.
All right. Item number 7, public comments.
Some comments.
Our heads are spinning, Frank, please.
Yes.
Okay.
I would like to recommend that the item number 3 on the agenda, public comments, be deleted. The public comments at the end of the meeting, I believe, are appropriate, and as long as I've been sitting here as a public, no one's really come forward with public comments at the beginning of the meeting, and usually when we have people here, one of the restrictions is that no public comment can be about the agenda item. So it basically, the only thing that people would have public comments on would be some historical value, and I represent the historical value, and I have yet to come up with something that would fit the bill for public comments at the beginning of the hearing.
But
This
Frank,
was, yes?
I don't think there's many people who are going to sit through the whole meeting like you till the end to make their public comments.
Okay, well, if they come to the meeting, they usually come because of a particular subject. And again, back to the restriction is you cannot comment about something that's on the agenda for that hearing. So they still have to wait to the end to make their comments for the subject for that night. It's a suggestion, it could be in a work session, and the other thing I had is, I didn't know that minor subdivisions, are they subject to public inputs?
I think in the same format as public input, butters first and then, yeah.
Yeah, because your procedures were, but you failed to open it up for public input.
You're right.
Because I would have concurred, stood in concurrent that what you did was correct.
You're right.
Because I would have supported that action, but there was two of us that noticed that it was not given over to the public.
Thank you, Frank.
Other than that, it was a very good meeting, and no further comments.
Somewhere along the way, I remember about where, and this might have nothing to do with this particular thing, but there was an article indicating that if you had a subdivision or a subdivision, and you subdivided inside that subdivision, that you had to go through the whole procedure all over again.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But this didn't have to do with that.
No, it was a minor, because a minor is 3 lots or less, including the parent lot, yeah, so, yeah.
Thank you, Frank, for those comments. Appreciate it. Well, duly noted.
Thank you, Mr. Public.
That brings us to item number 8, if we have a motion. Okay. First by Mr. Kelly, by Ms. Bishop, second. All those in favor of adjourning,
What time?
signify by saying aye.
Aye.
What time, sir?
It is 8:08.
8:08.
8:08.
All right, thank you.
Beautiful.
Here. Would you like some?
Oh, yes,
You can have
absolutely. Oh,
one,
yeah,
you can
yeah,
have
yeah. I
any
mean,
one you want.
None of these.
Man,
it's all contingent on him getting it to me quickly.
Yeah, don't we normally on item number 3, public comments,
Oh,